So, listen to this. Euro 2012, quarterfinal shootout, Italy versus England. The pressure is almost unbearable, a packed stadium in Kiev, the whole of England watching, and Andrea Pirlo walks up to take the third penalty of the night. Italy were up against it. The match had ended goalless, but England held a slender advantage early in the shootout. Joe Hart is doing everything he can to get inside Pirlo's head, poking out his tongue, waggling his hands in the air, trying to unsettle the Juventus maestro, and then Pirlo chips it right down the middle, a Panenka, in a World Cup-level shootout, and he doesn't even flinch. Everyone saw that moment and called it arrogance, ice-cold swagger, a man so naturally fearless he could toy with the biggest stage in football. But here's the thing, that story is completely wrong, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what Pirlo was actually doing in that moment, and why the real explanation is so much more interesting than he was just born calm. As Pirlo explained in his autobiography, it was simply the most sensible thing for him to do in that precise moment, because he made his decision at the last second when he saw Joe Hart doing all sorts on his line. As he began his run-up, he still hadn't decided what to do. Then Hart moved, and his mind was made up. It was impromptu, the only way I could see of pushing my scoring chances close to 100%. There was no showboating. That's not my style. So the most famous act of composure in penalty shootout history wasn't planned. It wasn't a rehearsed piece of theater. It was a real-time decision made in the final half-second by a man whose brain was still working perfectly while everyone else's had already frozen. That's what we're actually talking about today, not just how calm Pirlo was, but how that calm was built, where it came from, and why it turned out to be the most dangerous weapon on the pitch. And the last piece of this story is the one almost nobody gets right. Let's start with the position change, because this is where the whole thing begins. In his early career at Inter Milan, Pirlo was deployed in a more conventional attacking midfield position and struggled to consistently impose himself at the highest level. When Carlo Ancelotti moved him into a deep-lying role at AC Milan in the early 2000s, something clicked into place so completely that it transformed not just Pirlo's career, but the wider conversation about what a midfielder could be. And the reason that matters psychologically is this: Pirlo didn't just get better at football. He redesigned his environment so that the worst of the pressure almost never reached him. As the regista sitting in front of the defense with the whole pitch laid out in front of him, he had an extra second of time that attacking midfielders never get. He faced the game rather than being swallowed by it. Pirlo himself said it clearly. He changed my career, putting me in front of the defense. That's not a small thing. That's a man who understood that the chaos of the game was a structural problem, and he solved it structurally. The calm wasn't purely innate, it was partly engineered. And then there's the word the Italians used to describe what he did in that role. Italian football has long admired the regista, a word also used for a film director. Regista directly translates to director in English. His job wasn't to score goals or make tackles. His job was to set the tempo of the entire match, to decide how fast or slow the game breathed. And when you're the one controlling the pulse, you don't panic to the rhythm of everyone else. You set your own. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because there's a second layer to this that most people never talk about. Pirlo's entire identity as a player was built on fine motor skill. The weight of a pass, the millimeter-perfect dink, his exceptional vision, his ability to pass with pinpoint accuracy over short and long distances with either foot, and his extraordinary calmness under pressure became not just assets, but the entire engine of a Milan side that won 2 Champions League titles. And the thing about fine motor skills is that they are the first thing to go under high pressure. When adrenaline spikes, you get microtremors. Your touch gets heavy. Your timing goes. So for Pirlo, calm wasn't a personality trait. It was a physical requirement. Panic would have literally broken his craft. The composure wasn't cosmetic. It was the mechanical prerequisite for the one thing he was built on, which is also why the story about the afternoon before the 2006 World Cup final makes so much sense when you actually think about it. Pirlo spent those hours napping and playing PlayStation, not because he didn't care, because he understood that overexcitement, not underexcitement, is what destroys fine motor skills. He was deliberately keeping his adrenaline low before the biggest game of his life. Sports psychologists call it arousal downregulation. Pirlo just called it common sense. And there's a quote from his book that gets at the deeper philosophy behind all of it. The famous line is that he doesn't feel pressure, doesn't give a toss about it. But the actual idea underneath that is that he consciously reframed football as trivial next to real life. He made the moment small in his own head so it could never grow too big. Psychologists call this cognitive reappraisal. You don't suppress the pressure, you reclassify it. You decide it doesn't deserve the size it's trying to take up in your mind. He'd also been doing Panenkas since he was 13 years old, 20 years before that shootout in Kiev. So when people call it a once-in-a-lifetime act of nerve, they're missing the point entirely. That chip wasn't a flash of genius, it was a childhood habit. The too calm identity was built long before the big stage, not summoned on it. There's also a piece of sports science behind what you actually see when you watch Pirlo take a penalty. It's called the quiet eye, the idea that elite performers hold a longer, stiller gaze on their target before executing under pressure. The research shows that this extended focus is what protects skill in high-stakes moments, and Pirlo's eerie stillness on that run-up wasn't just a vibe, it was likely a measurable behavior, a real physical thing his eyes were doing that most penalty takers under that kind of pressure simply can't replicate. And here's the part that almost nobody frames correctly, the part I told you was coming. Hart had been shouting at Italy's penalty takers in a bid to put them off, and it was the hyperactive Hart who inspired Pirlo to pull off the Panenka. Think about what that actually means. Hart was dancing on his line, waving his arms, doing everything he could to create chaos, and all of it was a reaction to Pirlo giving him absolutely nothing to read. A truly calm player doesn't just stay steady, they create a vacuum, and the opponent fills that vacuum with their own anxiety. Hart attempted to unsettle the Juventus maestro, but Pirlo called his bluff. The Panenka didn't beat Joe Hart. Pirlo's calm had already destabilized him before the ball was even struck. Calm at the elite level is contagious in reverse. And that's the thing that ties all of this together. The position change that gave him time. The fine motor dependency that made calm non-negotiable. The deliberate pre-match routines. The cognitive reappraisal that shrank the stakes. The childhood habit that made the Panenka available. All of it added up to a man who, in the final half-second of a penalty run-up in a tournament shootout, could still see clearly, still decide, and still execute, while everyone else's brain had already gone to static. That's what too calm to feel pressure actually means. Not emptiness, not fearlessness, the ability to keep perceiving and deciding in the exact moment everyone else freezes. If this kind of story is what you're into, the psychology behind the players, the stuff that actually explains why they were different, drop a comment below and tell me which player you want next. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because the next video on this channel goes even deeper into a player whose mental makeup was just as fascinating as Pirlo's, and the story behind it is one most people have completely wrong.